I'm your host, Diana Longry. Thank you for tuning in. Off the Record News is brought to you weekly from the Public Access Studios in St. Paul, SPNN Studios. Now, I have with me this evening to help with our continuing report on the Hillcrest Development Project of St. Paul and the St. Paul Port Authority is Mr. Greg Copeland, who lives on the east side of St. Paul and who has been watching this project very carefully. Thank you, Mr. Copeland, for being here.
Great to be with you this afternoon.
Now, since our last newscast, we have been at a number of the meetings and pop-ups that have occurred with regard to the Hillcrest development. And we want to bring this film footage to you so that in the event that you were not one of the participants, that you have the opportunity of seeing what some of the discussions were all about, see the engagement of the people who did attend, and to hear what some of the consultants and the Port Authority had to say along the way, because that's all very important. Now, where we left off last week was we had film footage from a community engagement outreach meeting that was held on February 12th, 2020. There were approximately 165 people who attended this particular community outreach meeting. And they were residents of St. Paul and residents of Maplewood, because that Hillcrest development location is where the old Hillcrest golf course used to be, and it is right, even though it's in St. Paul, it's right on the border of St. Paul and Maplewood. So it really is of a joint concern to the residents, no matter which side of the border they live on. Mr. Copeland, any comments that you have with regard to that?
I think you've got that location just right, and it is nice to see the two communities being brought together. That I would compliment the planners on. You know, we've been, or I'll at least for myself, I'll say I've been critical of some of their decisions, but that's a very good one because it's going to affect both communities, and the goodness of this thing when it gets done, we're going to be positive here, will be a positive impact on Maplewood as well as St. Paul.
Right.
Hopefully.
And I know that back a few months ago, probably about a year ago or so, when Maplewood was going through their planning process for their 2040 comprehensive plan, I had attended one of the Maplewood meetings that was addressing some of the potential changes that were going to be made to the Maplewood comprehensive plan. And one of the questions that I asked was, in that area in and around the Hillcrest development area that's in St. Paul, what was Maplewood planning to do on the Maplewood border that was either to complement or that would be in coexistence with whatever St. Paul was planning to do? And the answer that I received at that time, well, they've had some talks with St. Paul, but that they really did, because they didn't know what St. Paul was going to do, they really weren't changing any of their comprehensive plan around that intersection as a result of the potential of the Hillcrest development.
Well, you know, both neighborhoods share the commercial possibilities. They share the need for residential development. I'll be honest. I think the thing we need most are senior type housing in that area. Huge demand, which would open up then housing that's already occupied by residents, which is in great demand by the large families that live in Maplewood and live in St. Paul, particularly on the east side. So it seems to me, I was just looking today, the Met Council has their door open for proposals on the Living Communities grant, like the one we got years ago in Maplewood, and they want to spend $5 million on various development of for cleaning up property, and then they have another $4 million earmarked for housing, They've got some transit-oriented dollars. This may not fit in this particular thing as neatly as other developments. And frankly, I was surprised that they had as much earmarked for that when the governor has put such a priority on housing. So, I mean, wouldn't it be interesting to see a joint application from the city of Maplewood and the city of St. Paul going to the Met Council and reminding them that the governor wants some housing? And we've got this beautiful spot on the east side of St. Paul.
And where it could really tie into that idea of enhancing mass transit is that McKnight, which runs right by the property, is a major transportation thoroughfare. So we're not talking about some little, cul-de-sac someplace that is little traveled. We're talking about a main drag.
Well, maybe we can impress upon Ramsey County not to turn that into a 2-lane road, as they are talking about doing, frankly, and to keep the 4-lane enterprise in place and to keep it in good shape, because it's used. I mean, I don't know why they would want to reduce the capacity when we talk about population growth, we talk about the need for capacity. We've already paid for this. Why would we shrink it somehow?
Right, and especially since a part of St. Paul's plans for this Hillcrest development is to have commercial, and that they are, aspiring to 1,000 jobs. Well, if you're going to have 1,000 jobs, that means you've got a substantial amount of commerce, and commerce does need to have major transportation routes, and this would be a straight route right down to 94, which then is the interstate system, which that couldn't be any better.
Right, or up to 36 and 694. That's what I mean. Why would you want to shrink a major arterial connection between 2 interstates and a major east-west state route? That makes literally no sense, and I don't have a engineering degree in highway construction or design, but as somebody that's been around the neighborhood for a while, it makes no sense. People love that road. They use it to make that exact connection. And if we have to throw in, let's put a commercial in for 3M, right? 3M doesn't want to limit their access either to their facilities. And I can't imagine that the city of Maplewood is going to sit by, or frankly, the city of St. Paul shouldn't sit by, as they have on other examples. But in this case, this is unique, I think.
Yes, very, very much so. Well, now where we left off last week was with a clip where the residents who were attending this community outreach meeting were getting ready to decide which of 3 circle groups, discussion groups, that they were going to join. And because there were so many people in attendance, they actually had to open up some additional rooms so that they could start other additional conversation circles in 3 different categories. And so one lady, she got up and she's asking some very pertinent questions, because how is a resident to know which circle group to join? Which discussion do you want to be engaged with if you don't know what the city and the Port Authority has in mind? So let's review her clip one more time.
Any questions about how tonight's going to run? Okay, yes.
So how can we get into these groups and make tonight effective?
Okay.
If we do not have a ballpark idea, like what you guys are figuring for a number of housing, number of jobs. We talked about green space a little bit, but not real effectively. If everybody's supposed to magically know which group they're supposed to go to and who they're supposed to ask questions, how is that serving as a community workshop?
So we don't have numbers right now. So there are no approaches that have been drawn, no alternatives that have been developed. So we don't know those numbers.
There has to be an idea, there has to be a guess. It doesn't have to be set in stone and this is exactly what we're doing. But the city has to have some idea of what exactly they're trying to do, or what is the point of us sitting giving ideas if we don't know.
So the basic idea of what the city would like to see here is a combination of housing, commercial, and jobs.
Yeah, I know that.
Okay, so I think as a number we could look at somewhere in the range of 1,000 jobs, somewhere in the range of a couple hundred units. somewhere in the range of, I don't know, 50, 100,000 square feet of commercial, just as a total starting point. But I can guarantee you that when you see alternatives 3, 4, 5, and 6 months down the road, that there will be more than that, and there will be less than that.
No, I just think
Okay.
that's really important for
Yeah,
this
okay.
to be effective and people to know who to ask and what to ask.
Fair enough.
Is one of the consultants that's been hired to facilitate these groups. And when we first heard this statement made at this meeting, we were a little taken aback because we know from our previous news programs and the film footage that we have shown from St. Paul and from the Port Authority that, and looking also at the memorandums of the Technical Advisory Committee, that the commitment is not 200 units, housing units. The commitment is for 1,000, up to 1,000 housing units. And,
And 1,000 jobs.
and 1,000 jobs. A couple of nice even numbers. So let's go back to last year when the Port Authority was before the St. Paul City Council, asking for the St. Paul City Council to vote in support of the bonding that would reimburse or help the Port Authority buy this property, the Hillcrest Golf Course, and the development aspects of it for $10 million, and put the full faith and credit of St. Paul on this purchase. So let's take a look at that clip.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the council. We're here today in support of the Port Authority's issuance of $10 million of general obligation bonds for the acquisition of the Hillcrest Golf Course site. As you know, we believe the site is an incredible opportunity for redevelopment, able to produce as many as 1,000 jobs and up to 1,000 housing units.
Mr. Copeland, when you're looking at the proportionality of $10 million compared to 1,000 housing units versus a development that has only 200 housing units, now suddenly you're talking about a very different financial paradigm, aren't you?
You certainly are. You're reducing it tremendously. And frankly, I think that's one of the things where, you know, and the Port Authority got this number from their consultant, which we won't mention, but it's a firm that's used frequently. And their estimate in that report was that this 1,000 jobs and these 1,000 housing units could be created. You know, I think, you know, maybe they ought to be honest with folks and say, you know, on 112 acres of rolling land that the neighbors do not want to see flattened to a pancake and stripped of all its trees, you know, keep some of the ambience for God's sakes. And we, you know, the other thing, Diana, that we haven't really talked about that much is you've got this huge commercial strip that's underutilized and underdeveloped, and it has been that way for 20 plus years on White Bear Avenue, both in Maplewood and in St. Paul. And you know, if we need some,
And that's called the Hillcrest Shopping Center.
well, there you go. and so why isn't the you know, this thing taking a little larger look at the existing problems, which are problems because I mean the old Hafner site, for instance. I don't know when, but it's been a long time since there's been a bowling alley and a bar there, and then you got the food trucks. That's not the best use of that property. You got a lot of traffic there that would not only come from the housing that would ultimately possibly be built on this site and all the existing neighbors that adjoin it, but the entire east side looks at the White Bear stretch there, or you know, for possible you know, economic activity in purchasing a variety of goods. And who knows how that could be redeveloped if we put a little energy and thought on it.
And connecting those two areas, the Hillcrest Shopping Center area on White Bear Avenue and the Hillcrest Golf Course, former Hillcrest Golf Course site, connecting the two of those is Larpenteur. And that is, again, a major thoroughfare, but it's undergone some reconstruction lately too, which tends to narrow that road as well. So again, this is a little contrary to trying to build up commercial connections within that Hillcrest community when they have that potential.
Yeah, I think, the one thing that was correct back in the summer when all this came up before the public at the city council, before the elections, was that there's an opportunity here, no question about it. But, to pave it all over and before you do that, to flatten it all out and take all the trees away and turn it into an industrial park, that's probably not the answer.
Right. Now, you may be wondering, what do these conversation circles look like? Because if you didn't go to the event, you're thinking, well, maybe everyone's just sort of sitting around. How do they operate? Well, they do have a consultant or a staff person in each one of these, at least one, in each one of these conversation circles taking notes. But as you can imagine, when you have many people in circles all trying to have conversations, it's a little hard to hear. And so let's take a look so you get a flavor for what these conversations look like and how functional they are in the long run.
Right. And that's back in the middle of
But that's exactly why we're here, to bring that out. Aesthetically, whatever you want to see.
exactly because of the conflict with residential. That's what you're saying, is that the industrial, the type of industrial company should be limited because of those processes.
Get everything figured out?
Haven't got much of it figured out yet. Well, you really got it. I hope they keep having these sorts of things instead of, I think this is it. This is the last meeting. But I think they've already figured it out. They're going to have those pop-up things. But I think these big community meetings, and I think this technical advisory committee, which is all private, that was the second thing. They've already got it all developed. So I think most of this is phony, but we'll see. We'll see. Hopefully you're right.
As you can tell from watching that film footage, even when the camera is right by one of these conversation circles, you can't really hear what anybody is saying. So the people who are in the conversation circle, they have a hard time hearing what their own members within their circle are saying. And our camera has a pretty good microphone on it, as you know from watching our film footage. We've been in a lot of places where the elected people thought for sure they put us someplace where our mics wouldn't pick up the sound, and yet we have perfectly good sound. So there is one of the problems with these conversation circles, which in the debriefing later on at the Community Advisory Committee meeting actually came up as one of the shortcomings of this particular meeting. Everybody was happy with the attendance, but a little unhappy with the acoustics of what was in effect for the conversation circles.
Yeah, they should be very happy with that attendance.
Yes.
You have to compliment them on that. The only thing that was strange is right after they filled the room with all these people, they announced that, well, we're probably not going to send out any more of those notices, I think they should keep sending notices and expanding and get another venue. I've said it several times, but it bears repeating. Hazelwood, the middle school down the street on White Bear Avenue, has a nice auditorium, a lot of classrooms. You can, you can use that at night and have a reasonable place to have these discussions in smaller groups, and then come back together as a group. And the seating is adult in nature, and it's not all claustrophobic and packed into a room where, The other thing I noticed too in this is, and I think it helps, is they could have passed out some name tags so that people know who they're talking to, and then who's a staffer and who's a consultant, and who's a citizen, and this type of thing.
That's a very good idea, because how would the people in that circle know who they're talking to. I mean, it creates a greater sense of community.
Exactly.
With the people who are in attendance.
They could even put on their street, for example, on the thing. I mean, there's a number of things you could do to bring that community aspect together.
Now, next we have film footage from the next meeting we attended, which was the Community Advisory Committee, which was held February 18th. And this is the group that has been formed of residents of Maplewood and St. Paul. And we've had some of their film footage previously on past news reports. At this particular meeting, it was held at the library, at one of the St. Paul libraries. And our reporter was met with a little resistance. And we've never had resistance before this time. But let's take a look.
I just called over to their people to see if they had any policies.
Want to go one more time?
Oh, sure. I was just saying that the library's policy is
What library?
St. Paul Public Library,
Okay.
which is what we're standing in on Tuesday,
Okay.
February 18th. Their policy is you need written permission from the manager to film at the library.
To film public meetings?
To film a public meeting, yes. And as
And you
far
knew
as I
that?
go, we've got no problem with it as long as the
Okay.
library signs off on it, and I'd be
Okay.
glad to talk to them,
Okay.
let them know it's a public meeting. if that's
Okay, would you talk to him, please, for me?
But you need the written permission.
Okay, well, we're just going to play this here because you did not alert me to this. So if you want to get my written permission for me, I'd be very happy to have that.
Okay.
But are you with the library department?
I'm an employee of the city of St. Paul County.
Okay, thank you.
So he then went back to go talk to somebody, supposedly, about this policy and about whether or not the camera could be there for a public meeting. Well, our reporter, because this is something that reporters should always do when they think that there's something going on in the field, is that you want to document what's going on in the field in case something ever comes up. So let's take a look.
Okay, I'm over here at the Hayden Heights Library, and Bill is telling me he's learned just today that I need written permission of the St. Paul Public Library to film. So he went out to bug them, so they might be coming here to throw me out. So, and I asked him at a public meeting held at the public library, you need written permission, and so he seems to be very engaged in this. I told him I'm just going to sit here and they can deal with it. So.
As it turned out, our reporter heard nothing further. Nobody came up to talk to him. Nobody told me he couldn't be there. So thank you to St. Paul Library staff for saying, yes, it's okay to have a camera there at a public meeting. My goodness, we all believe in transparency, don't we? Now, here's the ironic part of the whole thing, is that this same meeting, the city of St. Paul and their consultants were busy taking photographs and doing film footage themselves for their own promotional activities. So I wonder, did they have written permission? Oh my goodness, it's a public meeting.
When I heard that our reporter, our intrepid reporter, very skilled reporter on the east side of St. Paul and other venues, ran into this, I thought, my goodness, what are they up to here? They're trying to give themselves a black eye, in the PR sense of the word. Well, on their own website, Diana, the planning department website, PED's website for the city of St. Paul, there's a little line that they have. Meetings are open for public viewing. They're talking about the community advisory meetings. But comments should be sent to the Community Advisory Committee members or to the staff.
And see, our camera guy is assisting with the viewing aspect of that, because without our film footage, nobody would be able to view anything unless they were there personally.
Well, and-
because there's nothing to view if you go to the city website, because they don't have any video of these meetings.
And it's the city's own terminology, public viewing.
There you
So,
go.
you know, I think our reporter is, advancing their cause.
Exactly. So now let's take a look at our next clip where the folks at the meeting introduce themselves, and we want to show this to you so that you have an understanding of exactly who does attend these meetings, who's on the committee, who are the staff people, who are the Port Authority people, who are the consultants, and who is from the public. Let's take a look.
So I'm going to ask everybody to introduce themselves, what your role is. I don't know, I'm seeing some different faces over here, so I don't know if they're people from the public or the port or somewhere else. So let's start with you, Ann. Well, I'll start with me. I probably should start. I'm Linda Martinez Higgins, and I am a Maplewood resident, which is why I'm on this committee.
My name is Ann DeJoy, and I live over there. I'm the Planning Commission representative on this committee.
Kevin Berglund, I'm with the local media group Put Your Hands Together Productions.
Catherine Sarnicki with the St. Paul Port Authority.
Thor Solstrom, I'm a neighbor.
James Holtis with WSB, consultant for the port.
George Haney with St. Paul Port Authority.
I'm Jesse Harms. I'm just public. My wife and I live next door to Hillcrest, and we received the invitation to come. So.
Okay.
Is that me?
Yeah.
That's what they got.
Q Daniel, the housing representative.
I'm Rachel Panazadal. I am St. Paul resident and community liaison for the Greater State Community Council.
I'm Ethan Uston. I'm the multimodal transportation representative.
I'm Jeff Van Dyke with Cunningham Group Markets.
I'm Will Confrey, also with Cunningham Group.
I'm Tim Scanlon Johnson, the city planning intern with St. Paul.
Andrew Dressner with Cunningham Group.
Regina Flanagan, art landscape design, part of the Cunningham team.
Cole Reyes with Sand Associates, part of the team.
So those are all the folks in attendance. As you can see, it seems like there's more people on the side of the staff, the Port Authority, and the consultant side than there are on the resident side as to who's attending this particular advisory meeting. Now, one of the purposes of this meeting was to do a debriefing of the community engagement event that had just happened a few days prior. So we are going to include some of that film footage tonight, and then we will have additional film footage on the debriefing and the comments of the residents that came out of that meeting on our other news programs, either local news report or the Citizens Reporter. So please tune into those news reports. So let's get started with our first clip on the debriefing comments.
We want to talk about the event that happened last week, but we don't need to cover everything that we heard because we're going to deal with a thorough summary of all the community engagement next month. But 4 of you were there, so you may have some initial reactions or thoughts to share with the group.
Now, I was a little taken aback when he said, well, we're going to talk about the debriefing a little bit, but we don't need to do too much of it because we're going to do it next month. Next month, after they've already forgotten what they just heard, which was a couple days ago. I always thought that when you did a debriefing, you did it close in time to the event that you're trying to analyze, that you're trying to document, that you're trying to put the pieces together as to what you learned.
Yeah, and I'm a little surprised to hear the number 4 of you were there. With all those people in the room, all those consultants, I'm not sure who he was talking about. 4 of the citizens were there. Why would the consultants not be at the community meeting? It's got to be the most important meeting they've had so far from the perspective of the citizens on this project.
Right, so it is unclear if he's lumping them all in together or if he's only talking about residents who are on this advisory committee.
Kind of minimizing the whole activity.
Yes. Well, let's listen in on the comments from the attendees.
But it was very well done. First of all, I have to say that. I thought your presentation, Kat, was just perfect, and it covered what it needed to cover. There was a man sitting to my left. I was in the work area or work topic, that is an engineer with a medical device company. So he kind of thinks this way. And he leaned over and he said, I don't think anybody can visualize how big this property is. And he said, maybe if you took a map and you lay it over like a Maplewood Mall and say, okay, from Bean to this or whatever, people would be able to conceptualize exactly how big this property is, which I thought was fabulous. It was a fabulous idea. That was my thing I'll share today. Because he obviously thinks a little bit different than I do. So.
Now that is an excellent idea. And I hope that they do implement that as part of their ongoing process, because it does help people to realize the extent of this potential development and what can actually be done with the site to maximize its potential.
Well, and they certainly should explore the obvious option when the weather turns warmer and the snow's disappeared and the soils have stabilized. Have an open house out there on that property and let people walk around the perimeter or wherever they want to see and kind of experience it for what it is, if they haven't played golf there,
Right.
I think the community probably would like that, where they get to see what's on the other side of that green fence other than what they think is there, and get that picture that the chair was talking about in their own mind.
Let's listen to a comment from another attendee.
My comment, I promised to share this because there was a woman standing next to me when we broke out into separate groups. And you can agree or disagree with it. I thought it was well organized. I thought it was very well attended in spite of the weather. So obviously it was a great job. I think we exceeded our expectations about attendance. But she did think that it was done, she didn't agree with the breakout sessions right away. She thought we should have started with a town meeting and had people, gave people the opportunity to go to a mic and have that kind of dialogue first. And that this could have been a perfect second session. Now, I'm not sure if I agree with that or not.
Was she the lady that said you must have an idea, kept insisting
Yes,
that? Okay.
yes,
All right.
yeah.
Well, I would agree with that lady because it's hard to sit around in discussion circles and talk about things if you don't know what the background is, what the plans are, what the potential is, and the statistics of the various different things that go into making these very weighty decisions.
That's fair. I mean,
Yes,
that's
right.
fair. I think if we had started that way, we may never have gotten to the smaller discussions.
Right.
So, but that's fair.
Just feedback.
Yeah, that's fair. That comment's fair, but if we would have taken that time to do that, well, then we wouldn't have gotten to our discussion circles.
But then you would have a record of what at least the most outspoken people, perhaps, and maybe some folks that don't usually get up to talk, about how they view the property already. What's their preconception? I mean, people are coming to this meeting with something in their minds, obviously. The other thing is, I didn't notice, I wasn't at the meeting because you and I, Diana, were here at the studio recording another program. I don't know if they had an aerial plat map or something of that nature which could illustrate the site for people. That could be easily accommodated. There's a number of ways to put the focus on this better than apparently than they have so far.
Right. Well, let's hear the next comment from an attendee.
I was thrilled with the number of people that you thought about 160 were there, that the numbers that stayed to participate, whether they were angry or not, because some still had that edge. I thought that was fabulous. I was thrilled to death with that.
Good.
Now, as I indicated previously in the program, they estimated that there were 165 people, or 160 to 165 people in attendance, which is very good. But then I got to tell you that in the little internal memorandum that the city manager, Melinda Coleman, issues to the city council members and to certain members of her staff, she claims that the number was 250. And yet we have our film footage here from the folks who ran the meeting who say that the number is like the 160, 165. And yet Melinda Coleman over in Maplewood, who was not at this meeting, has inflated the number by 90 people. And I have no idea why she has manipulated the number at all, unless she's including all the staff, the Port Authority, the consultants who were also at the meeting. And if she did, then that means that there were 90 of them and 160 of the residents. So Melinda Coleman, what is the answer? Well, let's continue on with our next clip.
Again, I thought it was extremely well attended. I did not expect that many people, that I had a difficult time hearing everyone. So that would probably be my next request, to have smaller breakouts or additional breakouts of the same topic, just to kind of make it a little more intimate. I felt that Luis and I were asking a lot of follow-up questions to kind of get to the root of what the community members were saying. So, and only because there was a lot of background noise. So that would probably be my biggest feedback, was make them smaller, have additional breakouts, so that it could be a lot more intimate conversation.
And this is a very good constructive comment, given, of course, what we've shown in our film footage. So you can see where her comments hopefully will then get translated into action if they conduct any more of these discussion circles again.
And we'd have plenty of room down there at Hazel, at the junior high, if you will, the academy, with that auditorium for those other 200 attendees or 100 attendees that you're referencing in terms of the city manager for Maplewood, because where would they have been? Were they in another part of the building, or was this a separate meeting that she's talking about? Makes no sense.
Now, the next clip is where we're then transitioning to where they start to talk about the various segments of the discussion points, whether or not it has to do with the character of the neighborhood, or lifestyle living, or housing style. And so there were 3 different categories of discussion, and some of these also morphed into discussing jobs and the desire for certain types of jobs and the type of commercial, which, as I indicated, we'll cover all of that in another news program. But to give you a flavor of it, let's listen in on this clip where one of the consultants is talking about some of the feedback that she's giving to this group as to what was discussed.
The community character inquiry is probably the most general one, but basically the purpose, as I expressed to the people when they sat down, was to explore relationships, social values, the neighborhood's way of life, and the way people do things, and gather insights beyond those conveyed by statistical data. So it's an opportunity for people to speak up. And I'll just hand this out because I'm going to go right to the second page so I don't take up a lot of time. But here's some of the things that people said, and I guess we are all producing documents like this for you for reference that kind of gather the language that's that came right out of people's mouths, because I think it's really pertinent to give people an opportunity to have their own words reflected.
There is so much packed into that little clip that we will definitely have to discuss it at greater length in another news program. But just briefly, First of all, even though this is a very general topic as she describes it, I'm not certain how a discussion circle could really discuss the breadth and generality of this whole big topic in the course of only an hour or whatever was allotted for their discussion circle, because there's so much in that. And then she talks about how she's got it all written down in this handout that she's handing out. Well, she is part of the consultant team. She has the emails of all the members of this community advisory committee. Why hasn't this been emailed in advance to each and every one of those members so that they already have it, so that they can discuss it in detail at this meeting? And then she says, I don't want to take up a bunch of time. And yet it is so important to the project because we're talking about the community character. Isn't that what the foundation is built upon, is the character of your neighborhood?
Well, yes.
So you can see why you need to tune in to our other news programs, because there is just so much to unpack there, and she has more to say. So with that in mind, the next clip I want to show you has to do with the timeline of the Hillcrest development of the former Hillcrest Golf Course site.
So a little bit. All right. Basically, we are at this red dot. Next meeting, that red dot's going to move to there. Okay. I'm going to zoom in on this area in a moment. But this is a year-long process. We are a couple meetings in. Every month we meet with you guys, and this is CAC right here, so that's your list of meetings. These are all our other meetings that we have to attend to: the technical committee, the project management committee, and then other meetings. We're moving towards this point here, which is where we are going to present to you some approaches to the site. Everything we've been doing up to now is really background. So I've zoomed in, and you are the CAC, and here's that red dot I mentioned before. So today we're going to discuss demographics. We're going to do an exercise at the table we call SWOT analysis, and we're going to debrief from the community forum. We have been doing the community forum, and we have 3 pop-ups meetings coming that I'll actually ask Cole to share a teeny bit about in the upcoming week.
Okay, so now we get a good understanding of this timeline. They meet with the Community Advisory Committee once a month, but then all the rest of the meetings, 3/4 of the other meetings, all are with the technical advisory people, the staff people, and other meetings, which of course have nothing to do with the public and the residents who are all along that little bottom line. So then he talks about the pop-ups. Now we have heard all about pop-ups before when it came to the big long project of the Rush Line and their pop-ups, and we followed some of those pop-ups, and we're wondering, these pop-up meetings, they're called meetings. Are they really meetings? How effective are pop-ups? We thought we would take a more concerted look at pop-ups and how effective are they really? Or is it just a way to check off how many meetings that you had with the public so that it looks like on paper that you've done all this public engagement, when in reality, somebody could have just been sitting there and reading their book. So let's take a look at our next clip where they talk about the pop-ups and where and when they're going to be.
I will talk about the pop-ups that are coming up. We have 3 pop-ups. One is on Saturday. It's at the Makers Fest at Nance Park. What is that? Academy, that's right. Can't read my own handwriting.
What time?
It's from 1 to 3, and we're actually going to be doing an arts and crafts little project because everybody goes there to make things, so we put something together. Hayden Heights Recreation Center on February 27th from 4:30 to 6:30. and then Monk Village on February 28th from 12 to 2. So come stop by.
Think of those times. Saturday at a school, well, they're having an event there, so maybe that is going to be a good and effective time to have a pop-up, because there's a reason for parents and other people who are interested in the event to be there. So that sounds like that might be a good idea. Going to a recreational center, which basically is a building at a park in St. Paul, and going there right after, like, say, school, when all the school kids are playing basketball in the gym. I wonder how many people, parents or adults, are even home yet from work to go to that pop-up. And then there's also then the pop-up at the Hmong Village, which is not in the Hillcrest shopping center area or the Hillcrest golf course development area, but it's somewhere else over down there off of Johnson Parkway and Phelan Boulevard. So that's where that is, and you heard the hours. In the middle of the afternoon, again, are the working folks going to be popping into the pop-up? We don't know. But let's take a look at the first pop-up that was Saturday afternoon at Mounds Park Academy. Let's just take a glimpse at how many people were in attendance at the event in general. Well, now that looks like there's quite a few folks at that event, although I don't know if they were really actually drawn to the table of the Hillcrest Development Project people or not. Now, Mr. Copeland, do you recall that a few shows back, we played some film footage from the December meeting of the Community Advisory Committee meeting where they were talking about ways to have outreach with the public.
Yes.
And at one such meeting, pipe cleaners were used to engage the public to get input. And you and I, we were sitting here laughing and chucking it up that who in their right mind is going to be using pipe cleaners for public engagement about public projects when you're trying to get input of meaningful input from the public. Remember, we were laughing it up.
I do remember we were questioning what school of public policy or planning these folks attended, that their professors came up with pipe cleaners as the tool to use to engage our citizens.
And for our viewers out there, if you missed that newscast and you're thinking, oh, nobody said anything about pipe cleaners, that just isn't true. Well, let's take a look at the clip from our archives.
That's one idea. I went to another one that was very interactive once. They had, first they had a PowerPoint of different communities that had projects, whether it was a placemaking project or a park that they built or a school or, you know, and so they did a quick like videotape, and then they had a bunch of stuff like knickknacks and pipe cleaners and Legos and craft materials. They had a lot of stuff that obviously was purchased at like a secondhand thrift shop, and they asked and there were teams to build, and you had to pick out, oh, I have to build a house, or I have to build a park, or I have to do transit, or, you know, they had different topic areas. So they picked one, and then they had to, you know, use all this stuff and create that. And we have two artists sitting at the table here, and art is my passion, using art as a community engagement tool.
Art as the engagement tool. Well, certainly art can be used in the right context as an engagement tool. Certainly, but you have to have the right circumstances. Now, let's fast forward to that pop-up at the Mounds Park Academy that Saturday afternoon, and that would have been on Saturday. And so let's take a look at their table.
And that's really good.
I
a defective glue. I'm going to use this one.
No, isn't this a wonderful school?
This is amazing.
You know, this school at Mounds Park Academy, I might just grab that. Mounds Park Academy, this used to be the Hill Murray. This used to be Hill. This used to be the boys' school. The boys' high school of Hill Murray, and Murray was the girls' school down the street.
Oh, okay.
And then they sold it. They sold it to North St. Paul Public Schools. And it was a middle school. And then they sold it to Mounds Park Academy. Believe it or not, I substitute taught here for something. Not lately, but so I'm familiar with the school. It's a wonderful school.
So there you can see the table. You've got pipe cleaners, googly eyes, and other assorted little pom-poms so that you can make little monsters. Now, of course, to be fair, there are little thought bubbles that you could write in what your comments were, what you'd like to see at the site in the various timelines they have on their poster board there. But perhaps the pipe cleaners really didn't draw people to the table. And while I understand it was an interactive type of arts fair, it would have been creative indeed to incorporate some types of Legos or constructor types of building materials, maybe even Lincoln logs, in order to get people over there to think we're talking about construction and that we're not talking about using pipe cleaners to make bugs.
Well, if there were any little boys, and little boys haven't changed that much, they like building things, and they love Legos, and they love Lincoln logs, and the play school blocks, and all that good stuff. You might have had some kids on a Saturday show up, and mom and dad might have come over to see what their little Johnny was doing there, and I guess even Susie.
That's right. Well, now let's move along to the next pop-up at the Park and Rec building. It looks pretty desolate there, not many people there, but let's go inside the building and see what we find.
You got some video from Mounds Park Academy too, but again, it's going to be weeks before we get to that because it's just there's just too much other stuff.
Bye.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just.
You got it. You saw the table, and there's more pipe cleaners. And not only that, you saw the little skinny hallway that they're in over by the bathroom. Well, are you sure? Maybe we got it from the wrong angle. You know how like real estate agents use one of those fish eye lenses, and it makes the distortion of the picture so you're not really sure if the picture's that big or that small? Well, let's take a look again and see if we got a better shot.
No, there's no problem.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm just getting some of this pop-up meeting.
Oh, okay. I don't want to be in a shot.
No, that's okay. We're just getting some footage.
So they just popped up in the hallway. You can barely get around them. Maybe it's a fire hazard. Well, now let's move along to the third pop-up, which was February 28th. And that was at the Hmong Village in the middle of the afternoon. Let's take a look at the location. So if you've never been to the Hmong Village, it's a great place to go for getting a variety of different foods to eat, a lot of different merchandise that maybe you don't find in other locations that you would really enjoy. And we were guessing in advance where we thought they might have the pop-up. And we thought, well, it might be in that area that is typically the farmer's market, because since this is wintertime, there might be fewer vendors in the farmer's market area, which is in the middle. So let's take a look.
I should have brought my husband. I got lessons from Thai ginger.
Maybe you can make something that's not.
No, just stir fries. I picked up some dessert. Yeah. This is about the same size as the one that
I think it's a lot bigger. It is bigger. Well, it could be one for
Again, what did we see? The pipe cleaners. And now we see some Elmer's glue. I don't see that anybody is engaged by the arts and crafts. It's one thing perhaps I've had it at Mounds Park Academy, thinking that the pipe cleaner idea might somehow fit in. But the fact that it's just still in the box with the poster and without any thought we're putting it on the table, in some ways decreases the likelihood that people will take this seriously. They're going to see pipe cleaners and bugs and they're going to say, what's this about? And they're not going to think that it is something so important that they must have take that time to give input.
Yeah, it seems like the pop-up meeting purpose would be to introduce the project in a short little summary. Perhaps it's well done on the sheets. I don't know that they had it for the public there. But to feed a future public meeting, get people to come out and take an interest in the project from people perhaps that don't live in the project area or do, but to reach out to the greater East Side community and let them know what is possible here. But again, give them an action step, attend our next meeting. We want to make sure that the planners and the public gets to hear your point of view on this, or come and learn about what's possible here, what we're working on. I mean, just to go to these places and wait for somebody to come up and talk to you doesn't work. You know, I work a lot of public events, and you got to go up to people and bring them on over to your stall, or you know, the old Barker at the fair routine. I mean, if you want to engage people, then do it. You know, just standing there at attention, that doesn't get you anything. And you gotta ask them to do something as a follow-up, typically, you know, to make the engagement matter. Otherwise, it's you know, someone standing with their easel.
So we will continue with this as we move through the next couple of weeks, because we have a lot of film footage, as I promised, and of course there will be more meetings to cover and then more film footage. So Mr. Copeland, thank you very much for being here today.
Great to be with you, Diane, as always.
And viewers, thank you for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed our program. See you next week. Bye-bye.